Welcome in everyone to Flyover Fallout, a 2-1 loss to San Diego on the heels of a win in the Open Cup. But to say this is a disappointing loss probably doesn't do it justice. For this episode of Fallout, I'm Matt Baker, you know me. I'm joined by my friend in soccer, Justin Horniker.
Hello, everyone.
With a little camera magic, we're actually in the same room next to each other for the live stream. We'll get going on the pod recording in just a second. Let everybody join, and obviously a special Fallout. We're coming at you right after the match.
Yeah, I'm not gonna know where to look, so
that's true. Yeah, we're right next to each other. So this is kind of weird. Maybe I'll turn over that way. It's not as awkward.
Yes, that's better.
This is kind of bizarre, but if you're joining us, drop us a comment in the chat. We will get to probably most everything, especially if you have a question. We just got done with the press conference, hearing from Olaf Melberg, Kyle Hebert, and Conrad Wallum, and there wasn't a whole lot of positivity, right, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could have some positive in how like the first half went. You know, their man marking worked really well, but again, if you can't score, if you can't get in dangerous areas, if you can't generate, then you know it's the same thing we've been dealing with all season, really.
That's right. All right, let's get going with the pod. It's late, and unlike a win, I think everybody has a little desire for an earlier bedtime than staying up and celebrating whatever we just saw on the field. So strap in, and we'll get going. Welcome everyone to Flyover Footy. My name is Matt Baker, joined by my friend in soccer this week, Justin Horniker.
Hello, everyone.
For a Flyover Fallout, and unfortunately, we're back to looking at a St. Louis City loss. We had a slight reprieve for the Open Cup, but now we're back to where we've been for, I want to say, 2 months now.
Going on 2 months in the last MLS win.
Yes. Going on 2 months, last MLS win. I think it was 8 matches at this point. So we're going to dive into it all. We're going to get into questions from our live stream. We're going to get into the match flow. But like we usually do on Flyover Fallout, let's start with the starting 11. Because it was a promising starting 11, to be fair. We had Ben Lunt in goal, which means Roman Berkey, while returning to training this past week, had not yet gotten enough training in to see minutes.
Yeah, cleared but not available.
Cleared but not available. The rest of the team was pretty consistent from last week. Timo Baumgartel, Josh Yarrow, and Kyle Hebert made up the back three. Giannis Horn, Marcel Hartl, Conrad Wallum, Tomas Ostrak, and Akil Watts were a massive midfield bunch there. Cedric Teuchert and Klaus made up the strikers, but there's a lot of nuance to that lineup. It wasn't, I would say, a traditional 3-5-2. At times, to me, it seemed more like a 3-4-1-2 with what Marcel Hartl was doing. But some notes as I tee you up, Justin. Kyle Hebert has now started all 13 matches in all competitions for St. Louis City.
Invaluable, Kyle Hebert.
The only player. I mean, you talk about the most utility, useful type player, at least as far as Olaf Melberg sees him. It's got to be Kyle Hebert. We did have I would say, a massive offensive midfield going on with Marcel Hartl, Conrad Wallum, and Tomas Ostrak making up that midfield bunch, with Tomas Ostrak, of all people, playing the clear six.
And he, I think, did a pretty good job as far as like disrupting. He had, when I checked at halftime, had 3 interceptions, like 4 recoveries. So a role that you're not used to seeing him in necessarily, but at least for the first half of the first, until he had to make that sub really well for a guy that was not 90 minutes fit from what we hear.
That's right. And the bad news on this front, though, no Edu Leuven, no Joachim Nilsson on the matchday roster at all. And we've got a bit of there's bad news all around, let's be honest. Edu Leuven missed this game for personal reasons, and that is the only explanation we received. So we wish the best to the Leuven family and whatever is happening right now. That's as far as we can and should go with that one. Joachim Nilsson, though, back to the soccer talk. Joachim Nilsson missed this match because of discomfort in his knee. And if it feels like this might be, I don't know, the 12th or 13th time that I've said this on a podcast, you're probably right. Really unfortunate for Joachim Nilsson. And it's the same knee that he's been dealing with.
Yeah, it seems like, whatever's going on there, it's not to say structural, but like clearly there's something in that knee and that hamstring and that side of his body that's causing issues that keep coming back.
And we don't have an ETA. All we were told post-game by Olaf Melberg is that he missed it with the discomfort in his knee, and so we'll find out more. It's a quick turnaround, so obviously there's very little time to heal, get back into training, and all that stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't seem good for the upcoming quick stretch of games.
Okay, so let's dig into the actual match, and we'll talk about some of the themes and takeaways as we go through. But biggest theme that I saw early on, the high press was working. We were good at forcing turnovers. Our midfield was dynamic in how they were operating, which was kind of surprising given the midfield depth issues that we came into this game with. But that was one of the most, I think, we could probably spend a while talking about how that impacted the game. But would you say this might have been the best looking high press that we've seen under Olaf Melberg?
Yeah, I noticed early it was very aggressive. There's a nice like man marking scheme further back on the field too. So even as they would break the press, there wasn't really an outlet for San Diego. So obviously they're trying to pass into space. They're trying to get those 1-2s to build up through the back and then spring forward. And they just didn't have those opportunities until they did. But the first 45 for sure, it was from a lineup that I think a lot of people were apprehensive about because we've seen it before. But I think from an intensity standpoint of how they jumped out of the gate and for that first half, we're just defensively very sound.
And what did you think of the role that Tomas Ostrak played? I mentioned him a little bit there at the beginning, but by my count, at the end of the first half, he had the most touches on the team.
Yeah.
And it seemed like he was allowing the midfield to have a little more direction than they usually did.
Yeah, and definitely being that kind of disruptor through the middle as well. The best I've seen from him, like in that role, especially because I don't think I've thought of him as a defensive type of player before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the 6 I think he played here was less defensive because it might have been because we were doing a better job possessing, a better job progressing the ball. But at the end of the day, I think the way the first half looked, at least until Tomas Ostrak left the game in the 70th minute or so, the amount of mistakes, the amount of issues we were having in getting the ball from our defensive third into the middle third, they just didn't seem to be there as much.
Yeah, and I remember thinking at the end of the first half that like they're probably unlucky to not be leading 1-0 or at least have more opportunities just because they felt like from a momentum standpoint they did not to say dominate, but they had more of the ball, more of the pace of the game anyway.
First, I don't know, 20, 30 minutes, there were some really good opportunities. Tomas Ostrak helped to create some of those opportunities, not just with the high press that was in front of him, but he helped to connect our back line quite a bit. I noted, I think, 3 chances that led up through Akil Watts in the first half. And so it seemed to me like the success we were having in progression was utilizing a lot of the players that we wanted to see come into this. Giannis Horn, Marcel Hartl, Tomas Ostrak, Conrad Wallum. And then the progressions that were occurring on the left-hand side really allowed things to open up on the right.
Yeah, and I think for Giannis, what I kind of take away is that, like, talking to him last week and this week, is that he really does prefer to be a center back. But when I see him as a wing back, especially in those more like aggressive advanced roles, like I think his ability to send a ball in and to cut inside was important for some of this game.
So going into halftime, some of the notable stats to me, because I mean, when you get down to it, we didn't score anything. You had a lot of fun opportunities in the first half. You had a Cedric Toysher,
a lot of potential,
and that seems to be the theme for this St. Louis team in general. A lot of potential. You had Cedric Toysher at 29 trying to chip the keeper. Multiple good builds that lead to Akil Watts, and nothing really comes of it. You had a Marcel Hartl free kick at 44. At 44 minutes from like 23 yards out, and he sends it just wide left. So opportunities are there, and you look at the stats and you look at the things that go into this match, and at the end of the first half, we were doing well in possession. For a St. Louis City team, we were up to 43% possessions. We were keeping control of the ball for good phases of the game. We only had 1 shot on target out of 8 total shots, but San Diego only had, I think, 1 total shot, 0.05 XG for San Diego. So we were limiting the chances that they were getting just as much as we were getting at least some action in the final third.
Yeah, and there was a period like right before half where it did feel like San Diego had some momentum, but again, they weren't able to really penetrate the box. Their 1 shot was from outside the box. They didn't really have anything too dangerous come off from that. And then, of course, things open up from there. But heading into the half anyway, I was optimistic.
Yeah, and it did seem overall from the first half on like a vastly different match than the first go round.
Yeah.
Like you're looking for, and as we start to play teams a second time in the middle third and the final third of the season, you want to see a coach, you want to see a team that can learn from the mistakes of the first game and correct things in the second.
Yeah, and that's why I felt like good going half, because it did feel like they adjusted. It felt like I said, that man mark system was working very well compared to that first game where they were just kind of holding on for dear life for most of it.
You caught me taking a drink at the
Yeah,
wrong
sorry.
time.
I ended my statements.
So going into the first half, with the advantages in shots, the advantages in I would say tilt, because the momentum was clearly in St. Louis's favor.
Yeah, I'm looking at the momentum chart. I don't know if you had that pulled up, Matt, but you can see a lot of it where St. Louis does, especially the first half, and really until San Diego get the goal after those subs, that St. Louis had more of the momentum, more of the tilt through that point.
And so it passes the eye test to an extent. It gets us to a point where we're comfortable with how the St. Louis team is looking against San Diego, which the first game was abysmal in how we looked. That was Conrad Wallen's first appearance at left wing back. It was Cedric Twaishirt and Simon Betcher up front. So you could draw parallels to that ineffectiveness in the second half. But the first 70 minutes or so, you're seeing a lot of success. And the second half opens in somewhat similar manner. You're getting some dangerous opportunities there from Tomas Ostrak. The worst thing that happened with St. Louis is Tomas Ostrak decided to take a yellow card and pulling down Chucky Lozano at 59. But you're getting chances from like Marcel Hartl, I think at 52 or something like that, where the chances are still coming and St. Louis is still pressuring. They're still doing what they need to do coming out of the half. Where this play at 52, Tomas Ostrak winning a loose ball, plays it up to Conrad Wallem, gets it over to Giannis Horn, and it's Horn that delivers the cross into Klaus. This one may have been one of the closest opportunities around that 52-minute mark, where the cross that we are somewhat used to seeing in sporadic bursts from Giannis Horn, knowing Horn has the quality to deliver these kinds of crosses, was played over and just over the head of Klaus. This wasn't just over the head. Over the head was in the first half. This was where Klaus had a touch on it.
Yeah, just
and the ball bounces. Goes over the net.
And that's one where, if he gets over the ball just a little bit more, it's in the back of the net.
He plants it.
Yeah.
And then you had the foul by Ostrak at 59. The next really big notable moment, I think, were when the subs came in and when the game started to change a little bit. Valakari left for Ilowski for San Diego at 66, and then 73. Jay Reed, Simon Betcher, Jean de Silva came in for Giannis Horn, Klaus, and Ostrak. And I think you might argue that this was the turning point of the game.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because I look at the subs coming in. Jay Reed, I'm very excited to see Jay Reed again. Jean de Silva, I think, that's a player that they desperately needed in a portion of this game, of someone who's unselfish, that can take on a man or two. And then, just like the midfield completely opened up and they conceded that space, and then the rest was history.
And so the midfield opening up in that, the different. Well, so first off, let's look at why we made the subs, because Olaf Melberg post game told us that subs were because of fitness, tired legs.
Bit of an issue with that one, because Tomas Ostrak has not been 90 minutes fit. He's gone 45, he's gone 60, he's gone 30 as a sub. I don't know what the expectation is there for him to go 90 all of a sudden.
Yeah, I don't. Where does that expectation coming from? Is that on the fan side, or is that?
Well, as far as Olaf Melberg saying that they made the subs because the players were tired and they needed to work on fitness to not be tired,
as opposed to a prescribed sub where you would expect Ostrak, and all of a sudden it did sound like this was unexpected.
Yeah, him going to the 72nd minute, he hasn't played that long for majority of the season. And then, are you expecting him to finish that out with another 18 where he's playing well?
That's a good point. I hadn't actually thought of that, but that's a really good point. That he even spoke last week. Ostrak and Leuven aren't 90 minutes fit.
Yeah.
So if you're going to start Ostrak, you have an expectation. You would think that he's going to come and sub out. So that is kind of a bizarre approach to that, at least in how we were told it happened. But the change itself, it changed more than it wasn't quite a like for like sub, because you're bringing in Jean de Silva for Tomas Ostrak, which moves Conrad Wallem back to the deeper sixth position, moves him to a defensive midfield, and Silva takes more, I think, he was an attacking right side midfielder, but he came back a little bit to help connect the lines and to move the ball up. But Silva was obviously an attacking midfielder. So you bring in, you make this change, if you've taken it at face value, which we don't have any reason not to, you make the change because of fitness. And so now you're looking at the limitations that you have of those available to you. I made a comment post-game in the media room, kind of just wondering if you're looking for a defensive midfielder, and Tomas Ostrak had played a great job in connecting the lines and being a more defensive presence, but at the same time, you're happy with what Conrad Wallem was doing in that game. You're happy how Wallem was helping to progress the ball and getting into some dangerous positions higher up. You do have a defensive midfielder on the bench
who played for City 2 on Sunday as well.
Who didn't play on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So the fitness from a return from injury illness for one Jake Girdwood-Reich would seem to have set him up for an appearance here to play 25, 30 minutes in lieu of Tomas Ostrak. If you're trying to keep consistency in the game, if you're trying to keep your successful attacking players in the attack.
Yeah, and just like taking players out of their best position too is an issue. As far as like Conrad Wallem, I think he can play in the midfield, but usually you would expect him more in an attacking role versus like sitting back in the six and being that kind of connector.
And I don't know that I would point to anything bad that happened strictly because it was Conrad Wallem.
No, but it's the spacing that it then allows because the formation is all out of whack from what it was the first 70 minutes when you did kind of have control and you weren't allowing those balls through the middle and that buildup that then you saw directly after those subs, essentially.
Basically. So you get to 79 minutes, and this is where things just start to fall apart a little bit, where after City played it out of the back, you can start right from the very beginning because the initial pass from Ben Lunt was suspect, to say the least. It was putting Kyle Hebert in a very poor position to be able to
and operate. Like they had some passes like that throughout this game where they were a little bit lucky that the ball was not put in the back of the net.
Does this make you more excited to see Roman Aberki return?
A little bit, but again, I think the problem isn't in the goalkeeping, but like I do think that Berkey's leadership and just his ability to like connect that ball a little bit more.
Yeah, and so that was the initial thing. That was the initial problem. From there, you get Kyle Hebert trying to create space and clear the ball just a little bit. It doesn't quite make it to midfield. Puts Jean De Silva in a tough spot to try to win a duel at this point because the ball is basically no longer in single succession. He loses the duel near midfield in our defensive half. It was Anibal Godoy that the ball falls to, who plays it quickly up to Ilowski, who had just subbed on some 13 minutes prior. Ilowski takes just a couple dribbles and just blasts the shot from range, right outside. Yeah. Gets past Ben Lunt on Ben Lunt's lower right into the bottom left corner of the goal, and just like that, as quickly as it could possibly happen.
Yeah, that kind of deflated the air. Because like once you go down 1-0, then you start thinking like this team hasn't scored from open play very often at all this season. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it just felt like they were kind of holding on, not to say holding on for the draw, but they were certainly holding on with their momentum. Like San Diego had been charging back, and once they get that goal, it just felt like there wasn't going to be an opportunity to tie it up then.
And then you had a lot of kind of what felt like chaotic moments where things were, it was disjointed at some times, but also the 84-minute sub where Salio came in for Timo Baumgartel, it added a spark of energy for sure. Salio definitely, in everything he does on the field, adds a spark of energy, and that was very prevalent on the left side after he subbed.
Yeah, and I like him and Reed together too. I feel like they're both going to make those runs down the left and kind of give each other some outlets versus just having one wing back making the run and not having anyone not having a great option into the box for someone to run onto.
The thing that I noticed the most were trying to feel each other out, the timings. Because you could see the promise there between Reed and Salio, obviously.
And Jay Reed, I think, is still getting his feet underneath him for sure. As far as like coming back, fair. He only played the 45 minutes this weekend, and then like he had a couple touches in this game where you're like, yeah, he's still getting the feel for it. So maybe that changes with more time, but
that's fair. Hang on just a second. I'm told that my echo has gotten worse on my mic. So I'm going to fix that for a second. Justin, you want to riff while I do that?
Yeah. And just to kind of to nail down on the subs a bit, because I did think this was, essentially the turning point of the game. And I don't think it's the personnel, because I think you bring in the players that you need to bring in at that moment. Like you're looking at it, and you're thinking, okay, these are the players that they definitely seemed tired. And once you make that change, all of a sudden the formation shifts, the momentum shifts, the play shifts, and it just what was the plan? Was the plan then to stick with that group for 90 minutes and hoping that you get on the end of a chance, or hoping that things go well in the end? And listening to Melber kind of talk about making those changes because players were tired, I just wonder then what was the sub plan coming into that game. If you're getting to the 72nd minute, those are the first subs you make all match, and it's because like the subs that you make are because those specific players are tired, and it just screams like something it didn't go to plan, or something with the plan just didn't work out the way that they wanted it to.
Likely. Yeah, likely. All right. If you're in the chat on our YouTube, let me know if this got any better, and we'll get going again in just a second. One thing I will say, though, the connection between Saleo and Reed, not to harp on it too much, but the promise is there. One thing I just don't know is how much opportunity in game they're going to get to showcase this.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at a scenario like tonight where it's like if they need a goal at the end of the game, you're putting on Celio because he can make that happen, and you're putting on an attacker because you need to put players forward. But like we talk about sometimes, putting on another attacker doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get those chances.
That's absolutely true. Yes. Yeah, especially for a team where San Diego, they weren't quite bunkering. I didn't feel, but at the same time, they were protecting the lead.
Yeah, I think, once you saw that goal, you saw the time wasting come into effect. You saw, the dark hearts that come when you're up 1-0 on the road and things haven't necessarily been easy all day. It didn't feel like they were going to get an equalizer at that point.
All right, let's start to move on here because we want to talk about the next 2 goals. There's 2 more goals to talk about. I guess let's just go into the second goal. 87 minutes. San Diego gets the second goal, kind of puts the dagger in St. Louis a little bit. The wheels start to come off at this moment. It's Anders Dreyer who the best takeaway that I can have from this is similar to Danny Bouanga with LAFC. If you make a mistake with a DP of that quality, you're gonna pay for it. And Conrad Wallem, I think it was Conrad that spoke post game noting that. It might have been Kyle Hebert, but somebody said post game that if you make a mistake like this and it's a DP caliber player like that, they're going to make you pay. And it was Wallem. He said they punished him, and that was basically what happened because this didn't have to happen. I feel. Do you put the onus on the second goal, which for anybody who doesn't remember the second goal, this was the ball that was basically skied high in the air, received, quote unquote, by Josh Yarrow, and immediately Anders Dreyer, the DP attacking midfielder winger for San Diego, recovered it. He kind of had his first opportunity blocked by Ben Lunt, but then as he recovered it around the corner, he was able to get off the tightest shot possible and just get right past Ben Lunt.
Yeah, and that's a completely derail it, but you kind of saw this earlier. Chucky Lozano gets just a little bit of space, and he's able to curl a ball that goes just wide of the post. And at that point, you're thinking San Diego are a good team. If you give them an inch of space, they're going to take advantage. And then in that moment, Josh Yarrow just has to do better there to not play it directly into the path of the attacker.
But what's the worst part of that play? Because the takeaway from a lot of fans is Josh Yarrow cannot play for City. I saw the comments right before we started doing this. They're talking about Yarrow needs to be a City 2 player. This is what happens when you rely on your depth to play 90 minutes every game.
Would not go that far. Yeah, but I think it's a player that has played a lot of minutes recently, and you're getting late into a game where you have a fresh attack coming in. You have a really talented team that has been gaining steam, getting momentum. They have their goal. You have players pushed up because you're pushing for the equalizer. And then now all of a sudden your CBs are on an island, and then you make that mistake and it's game over.
CBs are on an island. That's the best way you could possibly put that. So we go down 2-0. We'll obviously be debating the Yarrow quality of touch and what that meant for St. Louis. I will say though that for Josh Yarrow, the thing that comes to mind immediately is Josh Yarrow doesn't play bad or not an MLS caliber for a vast majority of his games. The problem is when he is on an island like that, when he's asked to be a 1v1 defender, whether it's in space or that touch. It's tough touch. The ball's coming from space, basically.
Yeah.
But at the same time,
definitely not clean.
Maybe you see that's the limitation.
Yeah.
And maybe you see this is where the line is for Josh Yarrow, and this is what we should be expecting going forward. Because Yarrow's been with St. Louis in the organization for going on 4 years now.
Yeah, and I think you've seen good performances in that time, but you've also seen bad performances. Yeah. And I think, from your fourth, you're someone who should be your fourth or fifth center back. That's kind of what you want. But injuries, especially to Henry Kessler not being there in the middle, right. Then you kind of are setting him up to fail in that way, even though you need him to step up.
And if you think about it, to the credit of the roster construction for this team, you could point to two center backs that were out in this game that you would think would probably slide in over Yarrow at this point.
Yeah, I would say so.
Kyle Hebert being his 13th straight start, you immediately say he's ahead of Yarrow in the depth chart. But obviously, answers like Joachim Nilsson and Henry Kessler. You get one, definitely both, but if you get at least one of those players back, then Yarrow's spot in this team is now questionable.
Yeah, and I think it's telling that since Henry Kessler was injured, now all of a sudden there have been, several mistakes along the back line. I think that makes sense with Kessler being kind of the anchor in the middle and just like being the caliber defender that he is.
Fair point. And so that just makes the return of Henry Kessler all that more important. Even Joakim Nilsson with the quality out there, you can argue. I had in my lineup, my projected lineup with Nilsson healthy. I had Nilsson as the central center back, Baumgartel on the right, and then Horn on the left.
Yeah,
or Hebert on the left.
If you're worried about like quality of being able to settle and quality of that touch, like Nilsson's going to give you a better settle there. Yeah.
But either Baumgartel or Nilsson, I think either one of them would have had a better touch in that scenario. So not to harp too much on Yarrow because it's obvious. I just want to get into a little bit of like how much we should be frustrated by Yarrow making this mistake. And this is an example to me where injuries play direct. There's a direct through line from injuries occurring to Yarrow being on the field in that position. Now you kind of know a little better idea of what you have to work with.
Yeah. And when you have to, like I said, like ideally you wouldn't have to rely on your fourth or fifth center backs for such a long period of time. And I think they're much better used when they can play full 90, but it's not every single game they're playing a full 90. And I think you're starting to see some of that fatigue as well of just starting to come in.
But it wasn't all bad. We did have a goal.
Yes.
Right. And the problem is we now have another match without a goal in the run of play.
Yes.
That's the bad part. The good part is at 91 minutes, for a team that has struggled to do anything in the waning minutes of games, whether it's hold a lead, close a game out or anything, they didn't die. They weren't dead yet because at 91 minutes, it was Kyle Hebert unassisted on a set piece delivered by Marcel Hartl after a shot that Hartl gets the pass up in a great location. This is another quintessential Marcel Hartl set piece.
Very good. They had like 3 bites of the apple as well. Yeah. On that.
And Conrad Wallem nearly puts a goal in right before that. So Wallem's shot goes off the post back to Hebert. And then Hebert says the bodies were, I think Hebert was saying he was just in the right spot at the right time, which just goes to show that for set pieces, if you have a quality set piece taker, you just need bodies in there.
Put in the middle, calamity ensues, and someone's going to put it in the back.
You just need to clean it up at sometimes. And that's what happened. So probably obviously the best opportunity because they actually finished this one, but disheartening that we didn't find anything in the run of play.
Yeah, and I think it also, like, not to cut you off, but the intensity is not the problem. The problem is more execution. The problem is more like decisions that are being made, maybe in the formation, maybe in who we're playing, and how things are set up. But intensity-wise, I think you can tell that the players are like very, very much want to turn this around, and it's just not happening. And that's what leads to more frustration when you're just trying so hard to make it happen.
There was one last opportunity in the game that I made note of. One last push as Jay Reed took the ball to the left. This was a good example of him not being able to connect well with Salio, where Salio was coming back. It looked like Reed was wanting to play him up. They couldn't connect, so Reed ended up passing it off to Conrad Wallem, who gets it over to Marcel Hartl. Can't quite cross it up to Marcel Hartl. Can't quite head it over to Simon Betcher. Is one of those crossing up and getting it a header and then heading it over. It ended up being taken by the keeper Dos Santos. So that's how we ended, 2-1. In the second half, it was noticeably on the San Diego side, but not overwhelmingly. Like they came away at the end of the game, they came away with 0.69 XG. Now 0.64 happened in that second half. And the thing that really stuck out in the second half, if you're looking for a trend or a takeaway, is the reason we harped on that 3-man sub so much is because the period where the subs were made until had to have been 20 minutes later, when St. Louis finally had another shot, there were 8 straight shots by San Diego. They had the momentum clearly. That shape change, not really the shape change, but the personnel change and how they acted in the shape clearly threw us off in the second half, and it allowed San Diego to just build momentum continuously.
Yeah, that was the definite moment where everything switched. And, I do think that is just in the shape and just in how the formation shifted, because you can tell leading up into that, it wasn't just that, like, player-wise, talent-wise, things are going well. It's just that the spacing wasn't there for San Diego to build. The man marking just didn't allow for those 2v1s that they like to build out of. And once you make those changes, that space opens up. Now all of a sudden, they have room to maneuver. You see a couple of shots go out the woodwork, like pretty much instantly. It just felt like it was coming at that point.
And the game ends with St. Louis having 43% overall possession of this one. St. Louis had the XG advantage, 4 shots on target to 16. The biggest thing to me is St. Louis had the touches in the box advantage. There was 24 to 20 touches in the opposition box, though they were out-touched in the second half, 14-12. This was one of those stats that really mean St. Louis did what they needed to do in the first half so well compared to San Diego, and they weren't able to close it out on any of those opportunities in the first half, and so the game just kind of got away from them.
Yeah, it's of course, it's silly to say that one goal changes everything, but yeah, they get a goal in the first half from those opportunities where they're entering the final third. If they're a little more ruthless, if they're a little more efficient, and that's been a problem all season, is they just haven't been efficient enough when they are creating chances. They're creating chances, and they're just, if you look at, they're not creating enough chances still, but they're underperforming their XG like pretty significantly at this point.
Yeah, so is the biggest takeaway in this game the continued struggle to finish in the run of play? I mean, is it as simple as that?
Yeah, if they score 2 before that point, then you're not necessarily looking so heavily at how the game shifts. And, you're entering the second half up a goal and things are a little bit different. But I still think that there is reason to criticize, like, why the subs were made, reasons to criticize just like what the personnel was, and just why things are the way they are.
All right, I'm hearing that I'm getting picked up on your mic, so
Okay.
let's get closer here.
Okay.
So let's use your mic here.
Okay.
Now you see just how close. Watch this.
Ooh.
Yep. And there. Okay. So hopefully this will be better. Apologies. This is very much a trial and error thing going on here, and my editing is going to be put to the test on this one. So we'll see what the podcast actually sounds like once I make these edits.
It was my fault for suggesting I use my mic.
Which we did not test. Blue sky. So let me get that pulled up. All right, let's go into some listener questions from the pod, or from the live stream rather. Talking about lots of roster mismanagement tonight. David Riley, lots of roster mismanagement. I think we hit that on the sub context, right? So it's right here. I think we hit that on the sub context, but at the same time, you do have some of those injuries. You do have Joachim Nilsson, you do have Eddie Leuven absent that you weren't expecting either to be absent. So part of it is just nature of the beast. Part of it is the frustration of dealing with that.
Yeah, because I struggle with that, because on one hand, yes, you would like to see change in the 11. You would like to see some things maneuvered in a way that isn't what we've seen time and time again from the starting 11. But also, if players aren't match fit to go 90, if there just aren't the players available, if Melberg doesn't trust certain players, where I think that is kind of the territory you're wading into as well, then like from us, we can say that, so and so should have played, so and so should be getting more opportunities, but the coach doesn't trust him. If a certain player doesn't like fit in what the game calls for, I think that's part of it too. Is I think Melberg tries to match what the game calls for, matches how to play against the opponent, and I think that does ice some players out from getting opportunities in certain games.
Well, there's some comments about Klaus, Justin. Klaus didn't score, but Klaus played well, held up space like others can't. Is there a player who we have on St. Louis that can replicate what Klaus does?
Probably not. Like, as far as like what Klaus does, he's very unique in like what he can give you with that hold up play. I think, like, not to say that Caden Glover is a similar player and anywhere near as effective as Klaus is at this point. Okay. Looks like we sound good. Sorry, I got distracted. But yeah, I don't think there is a player on this roster currently right now that gives you what Klaus does. Because Simon Betcher is definitely a different type forward. Cider Toychert, a different type of forward. I would say he's more of like a 9.5. Whereas Betcher is more like your typical target striker. And then Klaus gives you a good hold-up play that no one else can.
Yeah. Can we talk about Klaus's bad comb over? We could talk about how Klaus for a period of time last season, I think, went completely bald, and that might
I think that's a good look for him. Yeah, I think I'm all for just being your true self, not trying to hide. If you're going bold, just embrace it. I think there's a lot of good in being confident in who you are. And maybe not to read too much into it, Matt, but maybe we can all be a little more confident, I think.
That's fair. Okay, fair. There's one comment here, Shrimp Collection Agency on X. Why are we so insistent on playing the same players week in, week out? Why are we giving no youth players the opportunity? Why are wingers being subbed in for central midfielders and center backs being forced to play out wide in lieu of our natural wingbacks who were on the bench? I think there's about 5 questions rolled into that. So
Yeah.
I'll start with the beginning. Why are we so insistent on playing the same players week in, week out? And I think it's a I think it's a combination of who we have available, first of all, who's healthy, but also we are seeing a trend, it seems to me, of players who are just Olaf's guys.
Yeah.
And if Olaf is forced into a situation where he's playing players consistently versus he has all of his available 11 at his disposal, that's what we're seeing now.
Yeah, and I sometimes wonder, as far as like roster selection goes, because Melberg has talked about how he likes using Mackay, he likes using, or he, liked what the homegrowns that trained in preseason gave to him. But then if you have a player that is, an off-roster homegrown, they have to keep loaning in that, isn't on the roster to play all the time and only has a select number of dates.
Yeah.
I think that limits, and I don't know how much of that is Melberg saying like this is what we need for the specific game. We don't need this player until summer or whatever, and how much of that is the roster that he's been given.
But at the we've got such a full roster though right now.
Yes,
that's another problem is the roster construction that I talked about on the last flyover. We have a full senior roster.
Yeah.
So if we're gonna have to make somebody's going to have to go out for us to bring in somebody of value in, because I'm like I saw the analysis that Will put together for Sports Hub STL, and the notion that based on the roster rules right now, he's right. We can only bring in a player without sending somebody out that's in like that $104,000 range.
Yeah.
That's not going to get you the value you need. So somebody has to go out, and that's a bigger conversation. Like, I don't want to get into that too much tonight because it's too much speculation on who we have available. But at the same time, like, that's why you're seeing right now some of the players consistently playing that you don't like that quality on, because just because, and this may be my biggest takeaway, and now I'm riled up a little bit. Just because a player comes off the injured list and is not on the player availability report doesn't mean they're immediately going to slot in. Roman Berkey was off the availability report. He didn't play. You think a healthy Roman Berkey in any other context would ever be on the bench? On a grass turf in St. Louis? No, absolutely not. Rasmus Alm has been off the injured report. Jay Reed was off the injured report last week, and he played for City 2. Jake Girdwood-Reich was the same way. He was off the injury report and played for City. Just because we are looking better on paper doesn't mean that we have access to the same information that the training staff. Don't shoot the messenger for bringing up the training staff. But just because we see players making progress and report on players, this is on us too. Like, we report on players making progress. That doesn't mean that they've clocked the necessary metrics to be able to immediately see game time.
I think to carry on that, there is something specific that they're looking for players to be ready. And some of that is being available an entire week. I think we've seen players come back towards the later portion of the week and just have been told that like that player did not train the entire week, so they didn't feel comfortable inserting him into the game plan. And I think that's a big part of it too, because players come back and the timing just doesn't quite work out. Now, when you have a set of games coming up like they do, quick and fast, like how much does that change when you just need bodies?
So the next couple questions here, why are we giving no youth players the opportunity? Mackay Joyner didn't appear today for the first time in 5 games. So he doesn't. He still has now 5 and 6 games. So he's played in 4 MLS games. He still has 2 more that he can appear in, because that's what the rules are. It's not the call-ups, it's the appearances. Jay Reed is young. I think he's 23, 24 years old.
23?
23. So Jay Reed is going to see more time. I think that's almost a given to me, is he's going to see more time in this second half sub role, and maybe spot starts if he has the fitness in the next few weeks, given the fixture congestion. But beyond that, I mean, there is a question about an ongoing question about guys like Caden Glover, Miguel Perez. Tyson Pierce is an off-roster homegrown, so we would only expect to see him in depth issues.
Yeah, I think the one, and Caden, I think, is interesting because I don't know where his position is, because he's kind of moved around the last couple of years, and what they're trying to find, is he a 10, is he a 9? And I think that flexibility has kind of hurt in like him being match ready right now. maybe Perez has played well for City too and getting in more advanced roles, and that's one that I would really like to see get an opportunity that hasn't yet.
Yeah,
I wonder what it's going to take.
And that's the question: is what is it going to take? And we don't have the answer to that because we don't see what they're doing in training. We just see who's in training sometimes, and so not seeing Miguel Perez, that's the only indication we have of whether he's being rated or not for first team time.
Right. Yeah.
The out of position questions. Why are wingers being subbed on for central midfielders? Center backs forced to play out wide in lieu of natural wing backs. I just got to point to part of two different answers. One of them is natural wingbacks who are on the bench. Are we talking about Jay Reed? Which natural wingbacks do we actually have on the bench? Because Olaf and Lutz have been pretty consistent in saying that right wingback is a depth problem. Like that is Thomas Totland is the unquestionable right wingback starter.
And I think you have an issue where you have wingers that like can certainly play out wide, but you don't want necessarily be your wingback. Like you don't want to have to rely on Celio necessarily to be your wingback.
Celio and Silva.
Yeah.
Those are the two things first and foremost. Is talking to the Atlanta folks, they when asked about the question, can Silva play wingback? That deer in the headlights.
Yeah.
Like he just didn't do it. Like so just because you're a winger doesn't mean you're a wing back. And I've harped on Celio's defensive mistakes a couple times in the past few games, so I have no desire to see Celio wing back.
And I think you're taking him out of his like best position as well. So like when you're asking these players who are natural wingers who want to get up into the attack, and now you're asking them to track back all the way to end line, then you're taking them out of where they're successful. Also,
I don't want to harp on this too much because this one could really dovetail, but this does start to get into.
Could spend another 30 minutes on it.
Is the roster that Lutz has built best suited for the positions that Olaf is needing?
If they're going to be playing like a 5-3-2, I think no.
Yeah.
I
agree because you're talking about putting a square peg in a round hole in how do you get Silva on the field? It's not going to be as an attacking forward who's going to stretch the field necessarily, because then you're talking about taking out or changing your system to the point where you don't have a Klaus, a Betcher, a Toyshirt, maybe even a Hurdle in that game, and you're having Silva as one of your primary forwards. And I just don't think depth-wise he's there. So you keep some of those other players on the field and you slot Silva back a little bit deeper. And we just have to see if that kind of thing can work. But it is a thing that has limited Celio.
Yeah.
And we've had that conversation going back to preseason because the expectation where Celio has played a wingback, fullback type role at City 2 at the very least, it's just not how Olaf seems to rate him, and so his time is limited.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because Celio is a very good defensive player in the attacking third, but not necessarily when he has to make those runs to track back and get to the defensive third. And when I think him, using him in more of like a 4-2-3-1 or 4-2-2 that, we've seen success in the past for him, gets him those opportunities to be isolated on the wing to take on defenders without having to use so much energy to get back and make those tracking runs, which I think he can do on occasion, but when you have to rely on him over the course of a 90-minute match, that's not his strength. That's not his strong suit. And expecting someone to do something that, isn't what they're good at, what they're strong at, I think is just setting them up for failure.
I absolutely agree with that. David Riley says, I'm not sure what Seti's role is supposed to be. Watts is consistently on an island when he gets the ball. Seti's role is best as an underneath striker. He's told us very specifically that he likes that role underneath the
9.5, so to speak.
A Nico Gioacchini role, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're seeing him try to be utilized, but he's covered up in a lot of scenarios.
You saw that on Wednesday when he comes in, playing next to Klaus. He comes back to. And of course, you're talking about playing against Union Omaha, not an MLS club, but still, that's like the aesthetic ideal of how you want to use Seti and how you want the team to score on the counter.
Yeah, and with Akil Watts, part of it, he was on an island in certain phases by design because, like I mentioned earlier, the first 30 minutes or so of the game, I counted 3 opportunities that I was disappointed in what he was doing. It was because we had built the ball on the left side, and then we worked it through the midfield over to Akil Watts, making the switch.
Yeah.
And it was in transition where Watts was on an island offensively. Like he was being unguarded, and the gap was closed very quickly. He didn't have the speed to get the ball off and the time it takes to
and I think, so often when you're playing Watts out wide as well, that's also not his ideal position. Like he can play there, he has played there a lot, but like he's told me before that he much prefers being a central mid, and I think that's where he feels most comfortable.
And then defensively, I think too, this question might get at the defensive part of it more so than offensive, if I was guessing. But I think on an island, that's the wing back role. So if he's playing a right wing back, that's different than a right back.
Yeah.
And so you're just going to see him on an island a little bit more as our center backs are tucking in a little tighter. It's the same opposite juxtaposition of what I just described San Diego did, but like magnified, because we have numbers in the box by design with our 3 center backs, and you're keeping Akil Watts purposefully out wide.
And if you look at the area map, like St. Louis did have control of the outer part of the pitch, and like that's what both teams want out of that.
Yeah.
And so you want your wingbacks to be isolated because then you have an opportunity to play it into the middle of the pitch and like create that width by then creating something in the box. But the problem is that they're not creating enough in the box.
That's right. Yeah, we might have had touches in the box. We didn't have that many passes into the opposition box. It was more carries. Numbers show that pretty easily. I think we have time for one more question, and I'm debating whether or not to go to the Olaf and Lutz type question or the thought. We kind of already did the thoughts on timings of the subs, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess we have to go to this other one. First off, really quick, David McDonald, is Olaf trying to save some legs for midweek start like Salio's? Yeah, minutes are being managed right now. That's unquestionable to me. I think I don't have the specifics of what his game plan was, other than the fact that it was noticeable that all 3 subs had to basically beg to come off, Horn, Ostrak, and Klaus, because they were so gassed. So that did tell me on a sub timing that we talked about the Ostrak concern of Ostrak was said to not be 90 minutes fit, so why wasn't he planning for a sub? Same kind of concept though, because those subs were made, I don't have my numbers,
72nd minute.
72nd minute. Subs were made at 72 minutes. That's not early.
No.
And so if you don't intend to, if you didn't want to make any of those subs, and you only made them because the players were tired, then what was the idea? Were you seeing so much positivity in the game that you wanted to go with everybody? And were you, because we've talked early in the season, before Edu Luden's injury, the other facet to this isn't just Olaf being prepared to make the subs or monitoring the flow of the game. It's monitoring the players. So early in the season, Edu Leuven was coming out at like 60, 65 every game before he went out for personal
reasons.
Coming
on like 62, and then Alfredo Morales to come in. Like that was the sub that would happen every single.
And the reason for that, we were told, is that the numbers were showing that Edu Leuven was kind of dropping off a little bit. He was going from 4th and 5th gear to 2nd and 3rd. And Olaf saw that as an opportunity. So we were at that point thinking, all right, data-driven coach, that's cool. He's making these subs proactively. But now you have this kind of game where it's very clearly not.
Yeah, I wonder if, you're to get into the Olaf question. Like, I think you're feeling the pressure of needing to get a result. Oh, hold on.
Losing an audio every 5 seconds or so.
My mic looks okay. Am I too far out of frame? Okay, we're good.
Did you mute yourself? That's hilarious.
All right. Oh, okay. Sorry.
In a quest to fix things, Justin accidentally muted himself.
That's on me.
If it wasn't for the chat, we would be absolutely hosed on this episode.
Self-inflicted error.
I would be so aggravated. You guys are saving our entire hides.
But yeah, so essentially what I was saying is it someone who is still no audio. Everything.
Unplug it, plug it back in.
Yeah, let me hold up.
Oh, it's it back.
Okay. Everyone.
Oh, I see it now.
Okay. Back, gone.
Now we're good.
Okay, I'm getting audio. Okay, I'm gonna keep my leveler up so that way I can
Don't
see
change anything else.
Okay.
Because we've got like 5-10 minutes max left, and this last topic is gonna be kind of a doozy.
Yeah. And so again, Matt, my question to you is like, did it feel like a manager that was holding out for a result because he knows he needs a result because pressure is up against him at this point?
He's got to be feeling it.
Yeah.
Right. The stat we looked at, and you don't want to compare it to last season, and you're not going to want to look at it, but we have through 12 games last season, this season, we are about, I think, 6 points off the pace. We're definitely off the pace. Now, last season, we had the different problem of we started off mediocre with all those draws, and then we just absolutely fell off. It was match day 12 of 2024 because people are starting to compare Bradley Carnell's time with how much time is Olaf going to get, how many points is it going to take, and the seasons were different. First of all, in the sense that Bradley Carnell at match week 12 started that epic run of losses.
Yeah.
Where we went 10, 12 some games without a win.
And with Carnell, you also had the baggage of how the second half of the inaugural season went, how the playoffs went, and then everything behind the scenes that didn't seem like it was going well also.
The player issues, and we haven't seen any player issues at all.
Yes.
In fact, Kyle Hebert and Conrad Wallem, I tried to broach the subject with both of them post-game about the locker room. Are there issues going on? And how's the leadership of that? And they were both pretty unified. We didn't see, at least at this point, we haven't seen anything similar to what we did when Bradley Carnell was getting fired, of the players talking about the locker room is fractured. That has not come up yet at all. So there still seems to be a lot of hope, a lot of promise, and a lot of excitement still behind the players, but they know they're capable of doing this.
And I think if you look at, to bring out the underlying numbers again, if you look at the underlying numbers of this performance here, like they should have had something in the first half that then changes it. And if you're looking at it that way, that you know, like you're close, then I think that leads to frustration of not getting the result, but you're frustrated with the performance and not necessarily with the manager that's setting up there.
But how long what's the leash on this?
Yes, that's the thing. Like, how often can you have close but not good enough performances before it's too much?
Because as a sporting director, you're looking for improvement from your manager. When you go through these stretches, you go through these periods of losses, no matter how many, it could be 2, it could be 12. You don't want to get to that point, but 2, 4, 5 losses in a row, you need to see improvement. And in this game tonight, to circle it back to specifically this game we're talking about, I saw improvement in a lot of ways of us progressing the ball. I saw improvement. We saw in the first half, into the second half. You could say that a lot of the improvements were kind of derailed by the fact that the managerial changes and the decisions were going on there were an issue, which does reflect on the manager. But at the same time, you have the manager sets the starting 11, and you have the things that were successful in how we were building up today. But none of it matters unless we finish. And that's primarily on the players to me, because if you're putting yourself in positions where you're getting you're out touching the opposition in the penalty area, and you get 0 goals at home when you win the XG battle, you can't do that game over game. There is going to be a breaking point unless we can start scoring goals and repeatedly score goals in multiple games. The problem that I think we're going to have is, I have a feeling, and this is just a feeling, that history is making this particular managerial situation sticky for Lutz. Because Bradley Carnell was what it was. And we talked about this before on Flyover, that the timing of Bradley Carnell's dismissal was quick in a lot of ways. He didn't get the chance to see the new players come in the summer, but at the same time, you set a precedent of being quick to the trigger. Now there's a fan expectation that you fired Bradley Carnell so soon. Olaf is off to a much worse start. So how long are you going to give him? Are you going to give him another few games? Do you give him the month of May? Because if we end the month of May and we have yet to win a game, and yet to score a goal, but also yet to win a game, I think then the seat is scorching hot.
Yeah, what's been sticking in my mind is that, like, make a big deal about playoffs being the expectation, playoffs being the goal, and now you're sitting here coming in tonight 5 points out. I'm not sure what the live table is at this point, but
I wouldn't look at it.
When you're getting to the end of May, and if you're still 11 points out of the playoff spot, then you're just like the situation there last year at the end of the transfer window, where you're needing a almost perfect run to the end of the season to even just scrape into the playoffs. And once you set that expectation, that, and like MLS, like, you should be setting the expectation of making the playoffs. Like, once you set that expectation, it's looking, and like you said, Matt, when it's starting to look like you're not going to make the playoffs, you're going to make the push with how the team is set up right now, how the team is being managed right now. That was the expectation last year.
Mm-hmm. Well, the question here, I'd be interested in see a comparison: the first 12 games of Olaf, the 12-ish games of Hack, and the last 12 of Carnell. You would probably see Hack, Olaf, Carnell, if I were to have to guess. And that's because the last 12 of Carnell were those epic disaster failures. He didn't win a game for months.
Yeah, and I will say that nothing that has happened, like the Seattle match was bad, but if you look at those last couple of Bradley Carnell games, like just everything, like the formation was off. Like nothing was going in the middle. It just wasn't working as like a soccer team.
It was barely a soccer team. We had 4 short-term loans for like 3, 4, 5 games in a row under BC at the end of his tenure. Hack was obviously highly successful in context, in comparison to either of these coaches so far. And that's the other perception problem is you had John Hackworth ready to go. You had John Hackworth publicly saying he wanted to have this job. And he carried St. Louis to, if you had extrapolated Hackworth's time at the end of 2024 to a full season, we would be a playoff team.
Yes.
And you choose not to do that. You choose not to give him the chance to extrapolate that to a full season. And so that's part of this. So the underlying question of how many games is it going to take before Olaf is on the hot seat, I tend to think the seat is getting a little toasty right now because
it has to be just by the expectations that you set for yourself.
Yeah, you're talking about making the playoffs, and as we dovetail to the end of this show, let's take a look at the live standings because at the end of the day on Saturday, now there's one game left to play on Sunday. We're recording this again post game the night of it just went final in Portland. Portland defeated SKC 1-0. And so there's one game left to play in the West, Vancouver and LAFC. And while it will be an exciting game, because of our position in the table, it really doesn't matter to us.
Yes.
So the MLS Western Conference table looks like Vancouver, Minnesota, Portland, and San Diego, 1 through 4. Vancouver on 26, Minnesota on 22, Portland on 21, and San Diego on 20 points. Then you have Seattle, LAFC, San Jose, Austin, and Colorado rounding out the playoff picture. You have Dallas, Salt Lake, and SKC all right in front of St. Louis, but it's really a 3-way tie for 12th. Dallas has 16. They're just outside the playoff picture. Salt Lake has 13. Sporting KC, St. Louis, and Houston are all tied with 10 points after 12 match days. So we go into Wednesday playing Sporting KC. We'll have a preview of that on Flyover later this week, probably on Tuesday, to get you ready for the SKC match. But we go into Tuesday.
Like, that feels like a must win.
Of all the matches so far, I mean, I can't think of a more must win. And it's midweek. Both teams are playing today.
And not just from the rivalry standpoint, but a team that like has not been good. You know, their win against the Galaxy where they didn't get a single shot, I think is very good from a hilarity standpoint. But they've not been good also. So you have to take advantage at home of your rival who is also struggling, or else that's not a good look.
That's right. And Sporting KC is 1-5-0 away, 1 win, 5 losses. So they haven't been good away, but this isn't going to be, not to spoil our preview, but this isn't going to be a look at SKC as much as it is a look at St. Louis and who we're going to have available, what's going on, what do we need to do better, what can we take forward from this game and build upon, and where are the biggest areas of opportunity to learn. Do you have confidence going into SKC based on what you saw tonight?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, especially because if you extrapolate the game on Wednesday where, it's still when they had possession, didn't look as confident as you'd want them to against the Union Omaha side, I don't have a lot of confidence that the progress is being made that needs to be made.
Well, we did see progress in this game in certain phases, but we also saw a lot of lessons learned. In the second half, there was the juxtaposition of the subs being made. There's definitely tangible things that we can take to get better on. And we have that advantage. Yeah, Jason Faust calls it. We have the advantage of staying at home 4 days from now. Yeah, 4 days from now, whereas SKC is traveling back from Portland. And so they have that disadvantage. We have every tangible advantage in comparison to SKC, even if we're not playing well. So to me, I'm going to try to look at the positives in the build-up, try to look at the positives in the individual play of guys like Giannis Horn, Conrad Wallem, Marcel Hartl. Obviously, Kyle Hebert had the goal. But when you look at, let's FotMob's players, you see St. Louis had Conrad Wallem, Akil Watts, Cedric Toyshirt, Kyle Hebert near the top. For the G plus, the goals added for this game, you're looking at Cedric Toyshirt leading, Klaus, Ostrak, Hebert, Wallem, guys who have had decent games. It's just the finishing, and that's where you bang your head against the wall and say, at some point,
Yeah, I don't know what the solution is there.
at some point, all of this has to add up to goals. If he loses to Sporting KC, I wouldn't be surprised. I'll just throw that out there. I would not be surprised if Lutz makes a managerial change if we lose to SKC at home.
Yeah,
especially if you don't have redeeming qualities. So if you're looking in the game and say this was a clear step back.
Yeah, I think the optics of that, plus losing at SKC in the way that you did, and then 2 straight at Minnesota, a team that has been just rolling lately.
Yeah,
you're gonna have to make
things start to get a little bleak.
Yes,
bleaker, I guess. So, not to end flyover on a sour note. One last question. Thomas Totland, is he training? Did you see him last week?
I have not seen him training yet.
He had the setback against Seattle, was it?
Yeah, where he was coming to sub onto the game and then ended up sitting down, and then he's not training the next week. So definitely something that was re-aggravated.
Yes.
Along those lines, they're giving him the time.
One of those players we miss desperately.
Yes.
But we are excited for this SKC game. We'll be here with you to watch it. And thank you all for tuning in on this post-game edition of Flyover Footy. Thank you so much to Justin Hornick for joining.
Thank you for having me. Sorry for messing up the audio.
Yeah, if you're listening to this on the podcast and everything sounds normal, then I have done a Herculean effort. If it has not sounded entirely normal, then this was work in progress. We appreciate you listening. Appreciate you sticking with us for everything that we have to talk about with St. Louis City. Again, a 2-1 loss to San Diego, the second time and final time we play them this season. For Justin, my name is Matt Baker. Thank you for joining us on Flyover Footy, and we'll talk to you later.
Night, everyone.
All right, and to the stream folks, live stream, thank you so much on YouTube for letting us know about the audio problems. We came straight up from the presser, and so we had no testing time. We just wanted to get this going as quickly as possible. So now we know for the future. So thank you.
I threw the mic curveball at you. That's on me.
That's okay. We'll see what ends up happening with the editing. I'm kind of excited to have to do this. So appreciate you joining us. Have a good evening, everybody. Happy Mother's Day to any mothers, or to if you're still with us, make sure to call your mom. Tell her Happy Mother's Day tomorrow.